Friends, I hope you are all fine. Today is a story about the boarded window. It is Ambrose Bier's stories. So let's start. In 1830, only a few miles away from what is now the great city of Cincinnati, lay an immense and almost unbroken forest. The whole region was sparsely settled by people of the frontier, restless souls who no sooner had hence fairly habitable homes out of the wilderness and attained that degree of prosperity which today we should call Indians, then, impelled by some mysterious impulse of their nature, they abandoned all and pushed further westward to encounter new peril and previsions in the effort to regain migrate comfort which had voluntarily renounced. Many of them had already forsaken that region for the remoter settlement, but among those remaining was no one had been of those first arriving. He lived alone in a house of logs, surrounded on all sides by the great forest, of whose gloom and silence he seemed a part, for no one had been ever known him to smile nor speak a needless word. His simple wants were supplied by the sale of butter of skin of wild animal in the river town, for no a thing did he grow upon a land which he needful he might have climbed by right of undisturbed possession. There were evidence of improvement. A few acres of ground immediately about the house had once been cleared of its tree. He declared stumps of which were half concealed by the new growth that had been suffered to repair the ravage wrought by the axe. Apparently, the man's zeal for agriculture had burned with a failing flame, expiring in pernicious ashes. The little log house, with its chimney of sticks, its roof of warping clapboards, weighted with traversing poles, and its chinking of clay, had a single door and directly opposite a window. The latter, however, was boarded up. Nobody could remember a time when it was not, and none knew why it was so closed. Certainly not because of the occupied dislike of light and air, for on those rare occasions when a hunter had passed that lonely spot, the recluse and commonly been seen sunning himself on his doorstep. If heaven had provided sunshine for his need, I fancy there are few persons living today who ever knew the secret of that window. But I am one, as you shall see. The man's name was said be Morlock. He was apparently 70 years old, actually about 50. Something beside ear had a hand his agents. His hair and long, full beard were white. His grey, lustreless eyes, sunken, his face singularly seemed with a wrinkle which appeared to belong to interesting system in figure. He was tall and spare, with a stop of the shoulder, a bearded word. I never was him. This particular I learned from my grandfather, from who also I got the man's story when I was had late. He had known him when living nearby in that early day. One day Morlock was found in his cabin dead. It was not a time and place for coroner and newspaper, and I suppose it was agreed that he had died from natural causes, or I should have been told and should remember. I know only that with what was probably a sense of the fitness of things, the body was buried near the cabin alongside the grave of his wife, who had preceded him by so many years that local tradition had retained hardly a hint of her accident. That closed the final chapter of this true story, excepting indeed the circumstance that many years afterward, in company with an equally intrepid spirit, I penetrate to the place and venture near enough to the ruined cabin to throw a stone against it, and I ran away to avoid the ghost which every well informed by boy their boat knew haunted the spot. But there is an earlier chapter that supplied my grandfather. When Morlock built his cabin and began laying sturdily about with his axe to hen out farm, the rifle meanwhile his means of support. He was young, strong, and full of hope. It was in that eastern country whence he came he had married, as was fashion, a young woman in all ways worthy of his honest devotion, who shared the danger and prevision of his lot with a willing spirit and light heart. There is no known record of her name, of her charm of mind and person. Tradition is silent, and a doubt is a liberty to enter his doubt. But God forbid that I should share it. Of their affection and happiness there is abundant assurance in every added day of the man's widow's life. For what but the magnetism of blessing memory could have changed by venture some spirit to a lot that like that. One day Morlock returned from gunning in a distant part of the forest to find his wife prostrate with fever and delirious. There was no physician within miles, no neighbors, nor was she a condition to be left someone help. So he set about the task of nursing her back to health. But at the end of the third day, she fell into unconsciousness, arrived, so passed away, apparently with never a gleam of returning reason. From what we know of a nature like his, we may venture to sketch in some of the details of the outline picture drawn by my grandfather when convinced that she was dead. Morlock had sense enough to remember that the dead must be prepared for burial. In performance of his sacred duty, he blumped now and again he certain things incorrectly, and other which he did correctly were done over and over. His occasional failure to accomplish some simple and originally act filled him with astonishment, like that of a drunken man who wonder at the suspense of familiar natural laws. He was surprised too that he did not weep, surprised and a little ashamed. Surely it is unkind not to weep for the dead. Tomorrow, he said aloud, I shall have make the coffin arrive, dig the grave, and then I shall miss her when she is no longer in sight. But now she is dead, of course, but it is all right. It must be all right. Somehow things cannot be so bad as they seem. He stood over the body in the carrying light, adjusting the hair and putting the finishing touch to the simple toilet, going all the mechanically with soulless care, and still through his consciousness rare and under sense of conviction that all was right, that he should have her again as before, and everything explained. He had no experience in grief. His capacity had not been enlarged by use. His heart could not contain it all, nor his imagination rightly conceive it. He did not know he was so hard struck that knowledge would come later and never go. Grief in an artist of power as various as the instrument upon which he played his dagers for the dead. Evoking from some the sharpest shrill notes, from others the low grey chord that dropped recorded like the slow beating of a distant drum. Some natures it startless, some it is stuff face. To one it comes like the stroke of an arrow, sticking all the sensibility to a keener life, to another as the blow of bludgeons, which in crushing venom we may conceive Morlock to have been that way affected for, and here are upon sure ground than that of conjecture. No sooner had he finished his precious work than, sinking into a chair by the side of the table upon which the body lay, and nothing how wide the profile showed in the dipping gloom, he laid his arm upon the table edge and dropped his face into them, tearless yet utterly weary. At that moment he came in through the window upon a long wailing sound like the cry of a lost child in the far deeps of the darkening woods. But the man did not move. Again and rarer than before shouted that unearthly cry upon his failing sense. Perhaps it was a wild beast, perhaps it was a dream, for Morlock was asleep. Some hour later, as it afterward appeared, his unfaithful watcher awake and lifting his head from his arm, intently listened, he knew not why. There is in the black darkened by the side of the dead, recalling all without a shock. He strained his eyes to see he knew not what. His senses were all alert. His breath was suspended. His blood had stilled. It is tight as is the silence. Who, what had awaked him, and where was it? Suddenly the table shook beneath his arm, and at the same moment he heard no fancies that he heard a light soft step, another sounds as the bare feet upon the floor. He was terrified beyond the power to cry out or move. Perforce he waited there in the darkness through seemed centuries of such dread. One may know, yet leave a tale. He tried vainly to speak that woman's name, vainly to stretch for his hand across the table to learn if she were there. His throat was powerless, his arms and hands were like lead. Then occurred something most frightful. Some heavy body seemed hurled against the table with an impetus that pushed it against his breast so sharply as nearly to overthrow him, and at the same instant he heard and felt the fall of something upon the floor with so violent a thump that the whole house was shaken by the impact. A scuffling in sounds and the confusion of sound impossible to describe. Morlock had risen to his feet, fear and had by excess forbidden control of his faculties. He flung his hand upon the table. Nothing was there. There is a point at which terror may turn to madness, and madness incite to action with no definite intent from no motive but the wayward impulse of the a madden Morlock sped to the wall. With a little groping, signed his loaded rifle and without him discharged it. By the flash which he lit up the room with a vivid illumination, he saw an enormous panther grabbing the dead woman toward the window. Its teeth fixed in her throat. When woman toward the window, there were darkness blacker than before and silence. And when he returned to consciousness, the sun was high and the wood vocal with songs of birds. The body lay near the window where the beast had left it. When frightened away by the flash report of the rifle, the clothing was denounced, the long hair is disordered, the limbs lay anyhow from the throat. Dreadfully lacerated had its issue a pool of blood. Not yet entirely conclusive, the ribbon with which he had bounded the wrist was unbroken. The hands were tightly clenched. Between the teeth was fragments of the animal's ear. Thanks for watching.